Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, all about getting started with the pensions module. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined by my colleague Alice, who's standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in the webinar. So we'll start things off with an introduction, providing a reminder of your automatic enrolment duties, and then an overview of the main options included in the pensions module. We're then going to give you some demonstrations on setting up the pensions module, either for a brand new business taking on employees for the first time, or an existing payroll that has previously been doing auto enrolment duties manually. I'll then give you a bit of an overview of where the pensions module fits into your payroll process, and we'll give you a quick demo of the main options there. And we'll finish by looking through any further support available to you, including some of our upcoming webinars, all pension themed this month, our help centre, plus much more. So that's what we're going to cover. Let's get things started with an introduction to your automatic enrolment duties. So automatic enrolment is pensions law, and it applies now to all UK employers. And the duties that affect you as an employer are to provide a qualifying pension scheme for your staff, to work out which staff are eligible to be put into a pension scheme, known as assessing your employees, writing to your staff to inform them about the auto enrolment law, and declaring your compliance with the pensions regulator. And these initial duties affect you as soon as you take on your first member of staff, or if you were an existing employer before 2017, you'll have been given a specific date, a staging date, when an auto enrolment applied to you. So I'd imagine most of you here have completed those 4 initial duties. But it doesn't stop there. There are ongoing duties as an employer that you need to comply with. You can read more about these ongoing duties on the Pensions Regulator website, which I've linked to on the slide. But in essence, each and every time you process your payroll, you will need to monitor your employees' age and earnings. So you'll need to assess them to see if they need to be put into a pension scheme, if they're not already in one. You'll need to maintain contributions to that pension scheme. So there'll be an employer contribution and you'll deduct the employee amount. You'll manage requests to join or leave the scheme, known as opting in or opting out. You'll need to keep records to show how you've complied with these duties. And then you have re-enrolment duties every 3 years that you need to complete, where employees that have previously left or opted out of a pension need to be put back in. So we're going to be covering some of these ongoing duties and how the pensions module can help automate many of these processes. And for re-enrolment, we have a separate webinar that we're running this month, and you can sign up for that on our website. So the pensions module was designed to help relieve the burden of automatic enrolment on employers. And there are 3 main areas in the pensions module, those being the pension assessment, which is run at the point you've entered your employee's wages. There are tools to help you send pension data to your pension provider, and we'll discuss more what options are available to you later in the webinar. And there's a pension correspondence option, which helps you to manage all of the communications that need to be sent to your employees when they join the company for the first time or when they're put into a pension scheme. Now, you can read much more about the pensions module in our help centre, and I have linked to that on the slide. And some of you may be wondering at this point, well, do I have the pensions module? Is that included as part of my subscription? So I just want to briefly cover off how you can check if you have the pensions module. So the easiest way to do this is to log into a payroll and then to try and open the pension assessment option. Now, if you see a prompt asking you to back up your data, that suggests that you have got the pensions module. So you take a backup before you do a pension assessment. Or if it takes you into a startup wizard, it means you've got the module, but you haven't set it up yet. But if you see the image on the right-hand side of the screen asking you to subscribe to the pensions module, that means that you don't currently have that as part of your payroll subscription. And if you did want to start benefiting from the pensions module, you would need to get that added on. So you can contact our team if you want to add that to your current subscription. So What we're going to go through today is setting up the module. So some of you have already done this, but it might be useful to understand the steps involved in case you ever need to do it in the future, maybe for another company. So there are two scenarios here. You could be a brand new business taking on employees for the first time, and you want to set up for a new payroll, or you might be an existing business that wasn't previously using the pensions module that wants to start using it after you've already kind of staged or your duty start date has already passed. So we're going to start with the simpler option to start with, setting up for a new company. And I'm going to give you a demo of the process here. So let me just bring the slides down and go full screen for you. So just to set the scene, this is a payroll that I've just set up. I've got 5 employees that started working for me on the 1st of September. So 1st of September is my duty start date, as that's the date that this payroll first took on their first employee. Now I've created the employee records, as you can see here, but I have not at this stage assigned a pension to any of my employees. It's really important to understand with the pensions module that you would never assign a pension scheme manually. You would let the module and the pension assessment do all of that for you. And that will then be able to create things like pension letters and pension data for your provider. So I've set up my employees, but none of them have a pension scheme assigned. And for this brand new payroll, I have set up my pension scheme. So as you can see, I've got a scheme here with Nest. I've entered all of my pension settings, and I'm going to be able to choose this as my default scheme when I go through the setup process. So when you're setting up for a brand new payroll, the first thing to do is to set your process date to your duty start date. So 1st of September was the date I took on my first employee. So that's the duty start date in this case. And then if you go to the company tasks here in the bottom left corner, you would then need to find the pensions module settings. Now, first thing it's doing is asking me to take a backup of the data. So we would strongly recommend that you back up before running through the startup wizard. Now, I already have a backup. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to click no. But if you don't have a backup, make sure you take one at that step. And then first thing we need to do is to enter our duty start date. So I'm going to enter it 1st of September 2024. I would then click on to start. It's then going to ask me if I'd like to set up pensions data exchange. Now, this is one of the options available to you if you're with Nest, Smart Pension, or the People's Pension, which will help you send data to your pension provider about enrolments and contributions. And we are going to cover this in a separate webinar later this month. So for this demo, I'm going to click no, and we're going to set that up later. And then you'll see there are 2 sections. There's setting up our payroll software and then informing our employees. And to set up the software, I just need to complete the 3 steps displayed. Now, if you do have multiple users set up for payroll, you will have an extra step at the start, which is to allow permissions to the pensions module options for your other users. But as I only have 1 user, I just need to complete these steps. The first of which is to set our default auto-enrollment qualifying scheme. So I'm going to click on to do it now. And I'll just maximize that so you can see it in full screen. So these are the pension schemes that are set up in my payroll. And the one that I'll be using is this Nest pension, the one that is set up for reference number 1. We can see that it's been marked as a qualifying scheme, so it can be used for auto-enrollment. And this particular scheme uses qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. Now, if you haven't already, you can enter your provider's reference for your pension scheme just here. And to set it as the default scheme, so the scheme that you'll be auto-enrolling your employees into, we simply select the option here on the right-hand side. Once I've done that, I can click on to save, and I can then mark that first step as complete. Now, if you do have more than 1 pension scheme, it is possible to set up exceptions to the default scheme. And then if you group your employees by department or cost center, you can then assign a specific pension scheme for employees within a specific department or cost center. And I'll show you that in the settings in a few moments' time. Second step here is to configure the pay elements. So we check which ones are set up as qualifying earnings. So I'm going to click on to do it now, and it's going to show me a list of all of my payments and deductions. Now, as a general rule, any payment subject to tax and national insurance would form part of the qualifying earnings. So in my case, I've got basic, overtime, and bonus payments, all subject to tax and national insurance, and they are all marked as qualifying earnings for pensions. But I also have an expenses payment, which is just reimbursing expenses, just post-tax, post-NI, and that's a type of payment that doesn't count towards qualifying earnings. So at a glance, we can quickly check that we've configured our pay elements correctly in terms of whether they're qualifying or not. So I'm going to save these settings as they are. And once I've done that, I can mark the second step as done. We then have the final step of this section, which is to identify any non-UK workers. So a non-UK worker is an employee who doesn't ordinarily work in the UK. So if you have any of these, they are excluded from auto-enrolment, and you can exclude them by marking them as a non-UK worker by ticking the box next to their name. But it doesn't apply to any of my employees. So once I've reviewed this list, all I need to do is click Save, tick this box, and you'll see now that I can move on to my next step. Now, the only other step for a brand new business is sending an introduction letter. This is completely optional, and if you want to read more about the Pension Centre, you can click Do It Now to read our help content. But if you do want to send a letter, you would actually send it from the Reports menu. So I will show you that once we've completed this setup. So for now, I'm just going to tick the step to mark it as done. And you'll see that I can now click on to Next. And it tells us that we're all done, and we're now set up for auto-enrolment. So nice and simple for a brand new payroll. I would then click Finish here at the bottom of the screen. And if I did want to send an introduction letter to my employees, I would just go into the Reports option, which you can find above the employee list. And then within the employee folder, here on the left-hand side, you've got the auto-enrolment employee introduction letter that can either be printed or it can be emailed if you've set up email documents for your employees. So this is an optional letter. It just explains more about the auto-enrolment legislation, and it could be sent to employees for a brand new company, just explaining more about what auto-enrolment is. So that's all set up, and if I go back into the pensions module settings, rather than taking us through that startup wizard again, it takes me into the settings screen, and I can check things like the duty start date, make sure I enter the right date here, and the default auto-enrolment scheme. And then this section on the right-hand side is for exceptions to the default scheme, which I'll show you a little bit later on in the demos. So that's your setup steps for a new company. Just to recap some of those steps, we started by confirming our duties start date. For a new company, it's the date you took on your first employee. We then went through setting up your payroll software, which is choosing your default auto-enrolment pension scheme, checking your pay element settings and making sure they're correctly flagged as qualifying or non-qualifying, and then flagging any non-UK workers if applicable. And then step 3 was informing your employees, completely optional, so tick the box in the startup wizard to say that you've done it. And if you want to run that letter, it is available from the employee folder within Reports. So what I want to show you next is setting up the pensions module for an existing company. So a little bit more involved with this one. So a company that has already had their duty start date. So maybe it was some time ago, maybe you took on your first employees a while ago, and you've just been doing it manual up until now. But you've decided you want to start using the pensions module, a wise decision, and you'll need to go through some setup steps. So I'm going to take you through this in a demo, but it's important to understand that you'll need to set aside some time to do this, and you will need records of your employees' auto-enrolment history. So information about which employees are in a pension scheme, when they joined that scheme, and details of any employees that might have previously opted out. And once you've provided all of that information, you've then set up the module, and then you can start using it from your next pay run. So let's give you a demo of this scenario. And I'm just going to switch to a different payroll. So this is an existing company. I'm just going to set my next pay date for this company. So this company started in April 2023. So their original duty starting date was the 1st of April, the date they took on their first employee. And they've been doing everything manually up until this point. They've decided that they now want to start using the pensions module. So I've got some employees that already have a pension scheme assigned because they were auto-enrolled when I was doing it manually. But I'm going to go through the startup wizard, and we're going to fill in some of the gaps so that payroll knows where to pick up from when we start using things like pension assessment. So first thing I'll do is go to the company tasks, and I'll choose the option for pensions module settings, exactly where we went before. Now, really important to take a backup first. So if you don't have a backup of your data, click onto yes, run through the backup wizard, maybe rename it so that you know where that file is. And then you've got a point you can restore back to if you need it. So it's then taken us into the setup wizard. It starts the same way as it does for a brand new business. So start by entering the duty start date. So this is your original duty start date or staging date, which in my example was the 1st of April 2023. And then when I click on to start, I'm going to ask you what you've done since your staging date or your duty start date. Now, you will choose the option that you assessed your employees manually using another system. You then click on to continue. It'll ask you if you want to continue. So this is just telling you that it's your responsibility to ensure that the information you enter on the next step is accurate. So the history of auto-enrollment for your existing employees. So we're just accepting that we've read and understand that message. And then it'll offer you the option to set up pensions data exchange. And again, I'm choosing to set that up later. So it's starting off similar to the other setup route. So first thing I'll do is I'll set my default auto-enrollment scheme. So this one does actually have 5 employees assigned to it. So I'm going to click Save. Second step was to check our pay elements. So just like before, check that we've correctly flagged our qualifying earnings. And in this case, I do not have any non-UK workers, so I don't need to tick any of those boxes. So those are the setup steps for set up your payroll software. But now we're going to provide some history about your existing employees. So in this step, we're going to enter details about the auto-enrollment status of our current staff. So we click on to do it now. It does warn us that we're going to make changes now that can't be undone. So if you do anything wrong at this point, you will need to restore back to an earlier point, which is right. It's really important that you took a backup first. And then it's going to take you through various stages, starting with employees who have no automatic enrolment pension history. So what this means is it's an employee that doesn't have a pension scheme assigned. So it wants to know why that's the case. And in my example, I do have an employee who opted out of a pension, and they did that right at the duty start date over a year ago. But then I have 4 other employees who didn't opt out. They're not currently postponed, so neither of those options apply to them. So maybe they just haven't met the criteria to be automatically enrolled. So we've provided the status for the employees that do not have any pension history. I've got 1 opt-out. I've got 4 that neither opted out nor are postponed. So we move on to our next step. And then it's asking us about employees who do have an active qualifying pension scheme. So these are your employees that are currently in a pension scheme. It knows when they joined because you'd have entered a joined scheme date when you assigned the pension scheme, but we want to know how they joined the scheme. So were they auto-enrolled? Had they opted in if they weren't eligible at the time? Is it a contractual enrolment, or have they chosen to join a non-qualifying scheme? So the scenario in this case is that they were all auto-enrolled. So that's what I'm going to set as the status for each one of them. And you can see it's also set their active membership date to be the same as their join date. And as this is all historical, I'm happy enough with that. So then moving on to the next step, these are employees who you've either said opted out or who have a pension scheme with a left scheme date in it. So again, it's asking for some missing information. Which scheme was employee 2 actually in? When they were auto-enrolled, it was our Nest pension. When did they originally join it? Back on the staging date. And we know that they opted out of that scheme. And let's just say they opted out at the end of the month. And then we've got another employee that has joined and then left a scheme. And again, they chose to opt out of the scheme. So we're choosing the opt-out option. So if I click onto next, the final step in this stage is employees that you've said are postponed for automatic enrolment. So it could be a very recent employee that had joined and you've chosen to apply a period of postponement of up to 3 months. But there's no employees with that status on my payroll. So I'm going to click onto next. And it then gives us a summary saying we've got 4 employees that need to be assessed. We've got 4 who are in a pension scheme. We've set them all as auto-enrolled. And we have 2 opt-outs. So they'll need to go back into the scheme when we next do our re-enrollment. So if you're happy with what you see here, you would click onto save. You can then print a report showing the same information. And then when we click onto finish, that's that step complete. We mark it as done. And then we can deal with any historical correspondence or pension data. So in this case, it's asking me about letters that have been sent in the past. And if I click on to do it now, it knows that there were 4 employees that were auto-enrolled. So we're just going to fill in some gaps about when they were sent these letters. So I've got 3 of them here that were auto-enrolled on the duty start date. So we're going to say that the letter was sent the same date. So I've put a date in here. You can see it's populated that for all 3 of these employees. We're going to say that the user originally sent this letter, but we don't want to print or email these letters now. We just want to show them as sent because they're historical. So I'm going to use this option at the bottom, show as sent. So it kind of marks those pending letters as complete. And I had another employee who was auto-enrolled on a slightly different date. So we'll put the sent on date to be their enrolment date as well. And we'll show that one as sent. So now there are no further pending letters. I can close out of this screen. I can tick the box to say that we're done. And then we are now set up for auto-enrollment. There's a link to our help center if you want to read more. But I'm just going to click finish. And again, if I go back into my pensions module settings, you can see it's got the duty start date, got my default auto-enrollment scheme. For this payroll, I do have some employees that would go into a different scheme to the default if they needed to be auto-enrolled. So I've got a department for these employees. So I'm going to click add to add an exception. So I've got a department I assign all my directors to, and I've got a separate directors pension scheme for them with some slightly different settings. And then other things you've got in the settings are default postponement options, where the system can suggest a postponement date for you, as well as re-enrollment settings that you use every 3 years, and phasing settings. If I click onto those now, It just checks that your pension schemes meet the requirements of the latest minimum contributions. So last ones took effect in 2019, and it's detected that all of our qualifying schemes meet the minimums. So these are your pensions module settings. You can come back and revisit these at any time. I'm just going to click on to save, and we are now fully set up. So just to recap the setup process for an existing company, we started by confirming the duty start date. That is your original duty start date or staging date. You would enter there. You would then select the option to say you assessed your employees manually using another system if you weren't previously using the pensions module. You then have those same setup steps, choosing a default auto-enrolment scheme, checking your pay element settings, and flagging any non-UK workers. And then the big step for an existing company is telling us more about your employees. So it starts with those that have no auto-enrolment history. So you need to say whether they opted out, they're currently postponed, or neither. You then work through those that do have a pension scheme assigned. So were they auto-enrolled? Did they opt in, join, or is it contractual enrolment? And then finally, those who have opted out or left a pension scheme, you'll provide some further sort of opt-out details. You've then got the option to send letters and data where applicable, so marking those as sent, as their historical letters. And once you've completed that setup process, you'll be able to get into your settings where you can check you've entered the correct staging or duty start date. You can check your default scheme. You'll be able to set up exceptions to the default scheme by organising your employees into departments or cost centres, and then choose default postponement periods if required. And then the other setting I pointed out are the re-enrolment settings, which we'll cover in more detail in our re-enrolment webinar. So now that we're all set up, I did want to go through a very brief demo on the pensions module. We will be covering the pension assessment and pensions data exchange as separate webinars, so we're giving you much more detail in those other sessions, but I wanted to just give you an overview of where this fits in and a very quick demo of what would happen once you've completed the setup. So on this slide, I'm just pointing out the tasks that are included as part of the pensions module. So if you work through the payroll tasks on the left-hand side, it's the ones that I've highlighted there with the green dot. Or if you're a process map user, it's the ones highlighted on the process map. A couple of tasks are pre-update. So importing pension updates is available for providers where you've set up pensions data exchange. And the pension assessment option is what you do after you've entered your employees' payments. And that will deal with enrolling anyone that needs to be enrolled and also opting in and opting out. And then you've got your post-update tasks, which is sending pension data to your provider, producing a report of the pension payments due, and dealing with any pension correspondence. So quick demo of that process, and I'll come back to recap the main areas. So just bring these slides down again. Returning to my payroll tasks. So what I've done already is I've set my process date, and I've been through to enter everyone's payments for the current period. So what I can now do is run a pension assessment, and you need to get into the habit of doing this each time you process your payroll, because this is how you monitor your employees' age and wage. So going into the pension assessment, first thing it does is prompt you to take a backup. So I'll practice what I preach, take a backup at this point, perhaps rename it. I'll put PA for pension assessment. And once you've got a backup of your data, that's then going to take you into the assessment screen. Now, with this being the first assessment that I've done for this payroll, you might have noticed that I have quite a few flags here on the left-hand side, telling us that employees are being automatically enrolled. But for most of these employees, they were enrolled historically. So this is the first time they are officially marked as auto-enrolled in a pension assessment. And what you can do is you can hover over their status if you want to see more detail. So this is an eligible employee. They were auto-enrolled back on the 2nd of January. But I do actually have an employee who joined us this period. They're a new starter. They meet the criteria to be put into a pension scheme, so they are eligible. And for this particular employee, they're being enrolled from their start date, which was the 9th of September. And we can see that contributions are being made straight away. So from here, you can review everyone's status. You can deal with opt-in and opt-out requests. You can do postponement for employees that have just become eligible. All of that we cover in more detail in our pension assessment webinar. So for now, I'm going to close out of this screen with that pension assessment complete, and then I can move on with my next payroll tasks. So that would include producing payslips and pre-update reports, uploading my payslips if I do them online, and then updating records in the usual way. So maybe taking another backup, and those are the records updated for September. I would then do my full payment submission to HMRC, and then we have the 3 remaining options for the pensions module. So send pension data can be used to send data directly to supported providers, so Nest People's Pension and Smart Pension. Review pension payments produces a report of the pension payments that are due. So if I click onto this, you'll see it comes up with report criteria, and then you can choose the date range of the pension payments you want to report on. Now that report looks something like this. Here's one I did earlier. So it groups it by pension scheme if you have more than one, shows the various contributions and the total amounts that are due to be paid over. And then our final step is the pension correspondence option. So when we go into this, this is designed to alert you to any letters that need to be sent. Now, if you've set up for an existing company for the first time you run a pension assessment, it will generate general notices for historical employees. So you can see I have a number of letters that were due to be sent kind of earlier this year and last year. So like we did before, we are just going to mark them as sent. So we can record a date they were sent and the user that sent them, and I'm going to show them as sent because this was all dealt with at the time. And again, it's filling in the gaps in payroll. It's providing some history to the correspondence that have been sent. And I also have a few more employees that joined us in January of this year. And again, we would have sent them that general letter at the time. So again, I'm just marking these one as sent. So they will then be moved to the historical folders. And the only current letters that I have are for my new starter. So this shows me that they need to be sent a general notice for auto enrolment, providing information on how auto enrolment affects them. And because they're going into a pension scheme, they also get a job holder letter. So this provides more details about the scheme they're going into and the date that applies. So you can view a preview of it by clicking on the letter title. So this is a job holder letter. It tells them the date they're being enrolled, pension provider, the right to opt out, and then various other information about minimum contributions. And when we're ready to produce these letters, and mine will be printed. I haven't set this employee up for email documents. What you would do is you would select the letters, you would record the date that you sent it to your employee. So actually I sent these out yesterday. I'm sending them as the user, but if you have a pension provider that deals with all your communications, you can choose provider and use the show as sent option. So again, it's mainly for record keeping. So that's the user, and this time I'm going to click send. And I'm going to confirm that I want to send them using the specified format, which in this case is print. And you can see it then brings up the printer details. I can print out both my general notice and the job holder letters. So we can look back historically at what letters were sent on what dates, or look back by employee. But again, this is an option that you would run at the end of your pay run to check for anything that you might need to send out. And that is a very quick look at the payroll process with the pensions module. As I say, more information on pension assessment and the pensions data exchange option for sending pension data available in our other webinars. So just to recap the main options I showed you, the pension assessment is done directly after entering payments. It identifies eligible staff and assigns a pension scheme to them if they're not already in a scheme and haven't previously opted out. It's also used to process opt-in requests, opt-out requests, and refunds. And as an employer, you can use it to apply postponement to a new starter or employee with a pay spike at the point they become eligible for the first time. Send pension data. There are many different options available depending on who your pension provider is. Pensions data exchange is a method of sending information directly to supported providers. So that's Nest, People's Pension, and Smart Pension. So it works a little bit like RTI. Think of it like a full payment submission, but a submission to your pension provider. It can also be used, if supported by the provider, to import opt-outs and scheme changes. And as I say, there's more information on our hub, and we also do a webinar on this option. If you don't have pensions data exchange enabled on your license, you have got an option of exporting CSV files for Nest, Now Pensions, or the People's Pension using the Send Pension Data option. And for any other pension provider, we will give you a bespoke report built to the specification of that specific provider, which will help you to create the information in Excel and then save a CSV file that you can upload to your provider's portal. So more information on that option can be found on the link. And finally, sending pension correspondence. You would do this at the end of your pay run, allows you to print or email your pension letters. That includes general notices for new starters, enrolment letters for those going into a scheme, postponement letters if you apply postponement, and every 3 years, people going back into the scheme will get a re-enrollment letter. And this keeps a record of all the letters sent in the historical sections of that module. So just finishing things off with a recap of those employer duties that I mentioned at the start of the webinar. So ongoing duties include monitoring your employees' age and earnings, which you would do each pay run by running a pension assessment. If you're running that option, you're not going to forget to enroll someone that meets the criteria. You need to continue paying into your pension scheme. So deductions will be made by your payroll. You'll be able to run that report to show the pension payments due to your provider, as well as send the pension information to your provider using one of those methods. You can manage requests to join or leave the scheme using the opt-in and opt-out options in the pension assessment. Pensions module's all about keeping records, so you'll have a full audit trail of any communications you've sent, as well as the pension status history recorded in the employee records. And as you'll see if you join us for our re-enrollment webinar, you can be helped with your re-enrollment duties as part of the pension assessment when that comes around. And link there to the pensions regulator site for more information on those duties. So that does bring us to the end of the presentation today. I would like to finish by running through some of the further support that we offer here at Sage, starting with one of our brand new services, which is our one-to-one bespoke training option. If you're new to Sage, new to the business perhaps, and you would like someone to take you through a tailored training session using on a one-on-one basis with one of our Sage experts, that is now a service that we offer. You can email us at ukisageuniversity@sage.com if you want to find out more about that service. So if you are, for example, wanted to start using the pensions module, you've never set it up before, you could book in a one-to-one session to get that all set up with our help. We do have upcoming webinars this month, all very much on a pension scheme. We do have an HR advice webinar on Thursday, at 2 p.m. about a new legal duty for preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. We've got an online payslip session on Tuesday the 8th, but the rest of the month is dedicated to pensions. So dates and times are available on the slide there. Just head to our website if you want to get signed up. Online Help Centre is available at sage.co.uk/help. And we also have Sage University with our e-learning certification and bite-sized learning at sageu.com. So we are nearly out of time, but we will stay on the webinar a little while longer just to make sure that we've provided answers to your questions. If you'd like a copy of our handouts, you can download them before you leave us just by clicking on that piece of paper icon. And we will send you a follow-up email later this afternoon, which will contain a link to the recording of this session if you want to review anything that you've seen or missed, or if you want to share that with any colleagues. As you leave us today, we will invite you to take our webinar survey. We'd really appreciate your thoughts on today's session. So if you do have a moment to complete that survey as you leave, please do so. We read all of your comments and we use it to improve these sessions moving forward. So I am going to go onto mute briefly just to have a check on those questions, and we'll come back to you when we are ready to close the webinar down. So I will speak to you shortly. Hi again, and thank you so much for sending the questions through. I think we've managed to answer the majority of them, so hopefully those answers have been useful to you. But as we are now out of time, we're going to wrap things up there. So on behalf of myself and Alice, thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars in the near future. So goodbye for now.